Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Midday Western U.S. Regional Forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, when we look back over the last couple of weeks, we can see that our western region was largely split north-south on precipitation patterns, with much of Southern California getting into Nevada and then down into Arizona and Utah. Very, very wet, with these deeper troughs that have penetrated into that area and really drawn in quite a bit of Pacific moisture. But you get there to like Northern California and Southern Oregon, then move up into Washington and Northern Idaho. We can see that overall we've had a relatively dry end of the month of November and beginning of December. And the big questions we have to ask ourselves and attempt to answer here is the flow pattern adjusting such that we could be bringing in some wetter conditions here into the Pacific Northwest, which is really lacking in terms of some early wet season precipitation. So let's get into this analysis and see what it takes to get there. First of all, I do see some favorable things happening when I watch this animation, which is showing you mid-level water vapor in the atmosphere over the last 24 hours or so. And what I see here is I see storm systems moving basically through the North Pacific. You can see them moving along the Aleutian Islands here. They're moving into British Columbia. There's nothing large and substantial just shutting everything down in this area. We can see moisture transport through that sector. We can also see the moisture kind of coming out of the tropics pushing into our region here. But overall, this is, this isn't quite the full, strong onshore flow events that we typically get this time of year that can really help out with bringing up our precipitation totals and our mountain snowpack. But at least it's not the worst scenario. Now, what I can't show you because I'm recording this too early in the morning here is I'd love to be able to show you another satellite image sitting right over the Central Valley of California where we have very dense fog warnings out for this morning. So be careful if you're traveling early this morning in the Central Valley. Can't see it on this map, but there's some pretty dense fog there. All right. So let's just get right into the meat of this. We're going to look over here at two different maps. The map on the left, European Ensemble, Week 1 precipitation anomalies, and on the right, Week 2. Now what we see overall is that California is the kind of favored state here for getting quite a bit of precipitation in the near term, while Oregon, Washington, especially right up there along the coast, may be picking up deficits between an inch to an inch and a half over the next week with just not getting much precipitation. Out into Week 2, we see overall, so look over there at the map on the right, out into Week 2, we see overall, I think, a drier pattern for parts of California, but we need to be discussing what's possibly bringing in wetter than average conditions in through here. Now I'm going to take that drawing off because I want to go from these two maps, which are from the European model, over to these two, which is the GFS. Now look at the map over there on the left. He says, I animate back and forth. We see a very similar picture. Look at the left between the GFS this week and the European. So European, GFS. Look at the right, though. The GFS is a much drier model into Week 2. And we discussed this in yesterday's forecast video, and that was the focus was going to be pulling more of that moisture up toward British Columbia and Alaska, leaving much of the western coast on the drier side of things here. Drier compared to normal, remember. So this is compared to normal. We see deficits here in Week 2 that range anywhere between a third of an inch, in some locations up over an inch and a half right there in Northern California. So we got to ask ourselves, what's driving this pattern and what does it mean in terms of breaking it down such that we could get some moisture into the area? So what I did was I lumped the whole western region together. So this basically takes us from Arizona over toward California, right up the west coast. This includes Nevada, Idaho, but then Washington and Oregon as well. So when we look at December precipitation, one thing to note is that the precipitation trend is relatively flat. What I wanted to do is I wanted to compare the wetter time periods that we've had with these drier time periods and see what kind of flow pattern we have to find to give us a wet December versus a dry. So if we're going to see any changes past mid-month, what are they going to have to look like? So we're going to go straight to the mid-levels of the atmosphere because you know it is about flow off the Pacific that determines if we are going to be seeing wetter or drier conditions across the west coast. And over here on the left, I have our driest Decembers on record, and on the right, I have our wettest. Now, it's quite an important thing to note. If we end up getting very low upper level heights, now what am I talking about here? That's a trough sitting where I just drew that arrow that sets up right there off the tip of the Aleutian Islands. That tends to give us a larger ridge that sits here over the west coast. Now, what does this do to the flow of the atmosphere? It means it tends to buckle like this. Tend to have a strong subtropical branch that comes over here. And as it diverts to the north there, that really, prevents strong west to east flow. Now, in years where that happens, in other words, if you look up these years, we tended to be, and if I can remove these drawings, we tended to be warm in the North Pacific and cool along, just off of the west coast of South America. And we do have that configuration right now. It's not a strong signal, but it's an important signal to be on the lookout for. But again, our worst scenario here is a jet stream pattern that has to slow as soon as it gets here to go around a larger ridge. On the flip side of that, look at what happens if we bring in a trough into this area and a ridge over the top of it. You see our jet stream pattern ends up doing this in this area, and as a consequence, it can also flow like that here over the Pacific Northwest and over California. So the differences really happen over the Aleutian Islands. The Aleutian Islands are kind of the key to setting up our Western U.S. Western U.S. upper level pattern. That determines the downstream trough ridges. So we need to focus our forecast on what's happening right here. That's going to be key moving forward. So let's see what we look for in the upper levels of the atmosphere in the near term. So starting us off on Tuesday morning, first big feature to watch is this cutoff low sitting off of the west coast of California. It will be the moisture feed for our precipitation systems here in the near term. Let's get this playing and pause it right here. So getting you from basically Tuesday morning to Wednesday morning, that upper level low comes on shore down here in Southern California. So we'll take a look at those precipitation totals in just a few moments. Next, after that, toward the end of the week, we are watching for a large low to develop here in the Gulf of Alaska, while temporarily a ridge sets up here just to the south of the Aleutian Islands. Now this big low will eventually push on shore right here. So toward the end of the week, I just showed you Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that deep low is pushing in and it comes through right there. So that means that toward the end of the week, we're going to get some strong onshore flow, especially into Northern California. Remember, that's in our next 5 days. Up here in the Pacific Northwest, well, this is not on the right side of this trough. Remember when these troughs sweep through, so I'll draw kind of a line bisecting it here. You want to be right in this corridor, not to the north of it, but right in this corridor. Now, after that trough sweeps through right there, look at what happens over the Aleutian Islands. You see broader troughing in this area, and the big ridge pushes out ahead of it. Now, that trough there is reinforcing this ridge here. And that's going to, well, it's sharp, but it's going to be bringing in some warmer temperatures and the wrong flow configuration to have us show up wetter than average in the week too. So see it? Trough in place here over the Aleutian Islands, ridge over the west coast. We know what that pattern gives us. Does that break down? Well, I'm out here now to the 12th of December, getting out beyond that, even out toward the 13th, 14th, and 15th. And I still keep seeing more troughing setting up over the Aleutian Islands, letting ridging build into this area. And that's why we see in the next couple of weeks, the pattern is not really reflecting wetter than average conditions on the whole because of that setup there. Now, this is not dry. We will still be seeing storm systems move through, but it is not the most ideal configuration, which would be where the jet stream does something a bit more like this. All right? So we see that our pattern is a bit more doing something like that. And that is just not quite the best configuration. So storm systems are moving through, but not bringing in the really wet conditions that we need. Let's see some of the details here, okay? First, when are these big pulses of moisture coming through? So these are our precipitable water maps. Remember, right now we still have this deep low sitting here, which is why today on Tuesday we're funneling the moisture in this direction. So we're looking for these colors being the wetter than average conditions in the atmosphere. We're looking at precipitable water. So playing this forward, look, Tuesday into Wednesday, there's the big push through Southern California, getting over to Arizona and the Four Corners states. Now after that, toward the end of the week, remember that deep upper level low sits here, and the surface low pressure system forms underneath it, and look at the ribbon of moisture out ahead of this. Well, as that moves toward the northwest, we see that toward our weekend, we get our next big push of moisture coming in. Now after that, as we keep playing this forward, we get into early next week. This is Sunday, into Monday and Tuesday. Drier start, But as we discussed in yesterday's video, we do see that getting out, this is going to be out there now around next Wednesday into Thursday. Look at that ribbon. Look at that push coming in. So we're going to have to watch that system as well. So I kind of see this coming in 3 big pushes here in the near term. One in Southern California today, tomorrow. The one coming in toward the end of the week into the Northwest. And then this feature here that'll be showing up about a week from then. Okay, so let's take a look at it from our operational European model focusing in on the West Coast. Here we go. This is the low, first low moving into California by tomorrow morning, pushing through, putting some snow into parts of Nevada at the higher elevation, and then that exits first. Now, at this time, next big deep low forms here Thursday morning, and it's going to be relatively quiet on the West Coast for a couple of days here toward the end of the week. But by the time we get into Friday morning, that's when the first rain bands around this deeper low start to kind of lash Northern California and the coastal Oregon. And then that low makes its way onshore. Basically, let me show you this again. Friday evening, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, evening, Sunday morning, getting into Monday. All right. After that, so that's system number 2, we got to get out here. This is now Monday night, getting into Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, evening. So that's a relatively calmer time period. And then as we get out to the following Thursday, this is where the next big coastal system comes in. So we still have these 3 systems. And I'll tell you something, we do have ensemble support for the development of that low. All right, so it is showing up in our ensemble models as well. So we'll keep an eye on it, but this is out there pretty far. This is out about 9 days. So we'll keep a close eye on this. But that's our pattern in the coming time period. So let's just take a look at your next 5 days in terms of total accumulated precipitation. Overall, what do we see? A lot of the focus is going to be up here in British Columbia and then down here in California. Zooming in on California, that's the map over there on the right. We do see that getting into the Central Valley, we have the potential for grabbing anywhere between 1/3 to 1/2 inch of rain. This will, of course, be elevation dependent. So as it goes up over the Sierra Nevada, or over the San Gabriel, or either of our coastal ranges in through here, we have the potential for picking up much more precipitation. Through the next 5 days, maybe some locations picking up 2 to 3 inches of rainfall right there along the California coast. So this is the first big push that's coming through. In terms of snowfall, I have the next 5 days over here on the left, and then the following 5 days over here on the right. So what the map over there on the right is going to capture is that second big system that's making its way onshore Thursday of next week. So it's starting to show some of the bigger precipitation amounts that are coming into the Cascade Mountains and then eventually into the northern Rockies, which you can see there in Idaho and Montana. So that's what we're looking at here in the next 10 days in terms of snowfall overall. What are our temperatures going to do? Well, we're not getting any really deep troughs that come from Alaska, like sliding down the coast, bringing in the colder temperatures. Notice each time we have a trough, they're kind of coming here out of the open Pacific. So they're not full of really cold air. That's why we see in the next 5 days, temperatures relatively close to normal with a slight warm bias for much of the western part of the United States. If anything, our temperatures drop off just due to cloud cover and precipitation when compared to normal. But the pattern is not one set up to be very cold. When we get into days 6 through 10, again, this is where our pattern gets quite amplified here, where we start to dig into that deeper trough that comes into the Aleutian Islands and builds in that ridge that does this. And that trough there and this trough here are linked up. And we saw that certainly in the upper level flow pattern I just showed you. And getting out to the 11 to 15 day time period, we're still looking at overall moderate temperatures, but that's because we just get much of our colder air tucked into central Canada coming into the east coast and no deep troughs that are really bringing down the colder air from like Alaska at any time soon. So what's complicating all of this? Well, let me just show you the big feature that I'm most concerned about. We're going to be seeing over the next 10 days heights building here and falling off here. Now this is in the stratosphere. And what I'm concerned about is this feature here. This is a piece of the polar vortex. We need to watch if by mid-December this feature slides around and sets up either here over the Aleutian Islands, or is it able to get all the way over toward the west coast? Because the end of our month is going to be determined by 2 things. The first will be that polar vortex position. The second is the fact that the Indian Ocean dipole is finally collapsing. We talked about it yesterday, but this is just another update. We see that right here during this time period, this is the 13th through the 17th, we are losing the strong upper level subsidence in this area. And what that means is after that goes away, we'll have a whole different flow pattern in the North Pacific. And what that will look like will be a combination of this polar vortex splitting event and probably the increased speed in the Pacific jet stream coming off of Japan. And that could give us an entirely different look at the second half of the month of December. And it's one thing I'm going to have to analyze and look at very carefully. And we'll prepare that for you and deliver it in tomorrow's long-range forecast. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop right here. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.